Okay, guys, and welcome to the podcast. There's no name on this podcast because myself and Jack have literally just decided to do a podcast, and from here on out, we'll see what happens. We might decide to do a couple more. I know Jack might have a couple more in the pipeline. I know personally, this is something that I do want to get into quite a bit because it's somewhere where we can actually, you know, not just have sound bites and just use big words without giving any context into them, because I think that is how social media is kind of running these days with regard to, let's get what we can into a 30-second clip here, and from there you miss out on so much nuance. And in fact, what you can find is that a lot of individuals maybe don't even understand what they're actually trying to say. Whereas if you had them on a podcast like this, for example, you might realize that pretty quickly. Or at the very least, you'll figure out that there's a lot more nuance than what you might hear in a one liner on TikTok or Instagram, for example. So, um, other than that, I guess myself, I moved to the gym which Jack trains at quite recently, aka in Tokers Business Park, Nice Newbridge. What would you say?
It's actually nice. Yeah,
It's a,
it's like in
okay,
between.
okay. I call it Newbridge because it's not in Nice,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
people in Newbridge probably call it Nice.
yeah.
um, but yeah, so basically we've been just chatting absolute shit in the gym for quite a period of time now, and probably doubling the length of sessions some days.
Yeah.
Uh, so we said we'd come together and hop on a podcast and probably like delve into these things a little bit more deeply so that we can talk here basically. So Jack, how are you keeping, my man?
All good, all good. Yeah, that's pretty much wraps it up. Hopefully through the likes of this podcast, we can give some practical takeaways for people to improve their own kind of progress in the gym, progress with their own physique, and like you said, obviously try and give a little bit more context and nuance when it comes to different topics, in the areas of obviously resistance training and like nutrition and other variables that will progress kind of physique development. And obviously when it comes to this podcast, it's going to be centered around physique development and not so much other aspects of kind of like training. So
Yeah,
um yeah, that's definitely the purpose of this podcast, and I think it'll be very useful for a lot of people.
I think that's an important point because, as well, like what we might say here might have absolutely no relevance or have little relevance in another context, maybe a field sport or something like that. Um, but yeah, so Jack, when I've been kind of meeting you in the gym and stuff like that, I've been quite impressed by your biomechanics understanding of things, your understanding of anatomy, and the practical application of that. Because one thing that you'll find is that it's quite easy to understand, you know, say different functions of this different muscle groups in from a book setting, but then when you look at how that actually is applied when a body is in motion, it's quite different than just what the book will state. Um, I've been impressed with you on that, so we'll probably dig into some biomechanic kind of stuff today. Um, you've got a good background in that, so I'll be interested to hear a few parts on you on that. Would that be fair to say that you're pretty damn good at that sort of stuff?
Well, I think I have a decent understanding. Yeah, so obviously still learning, still trying to improve in that area, and there's always some room for improvement when it comes to kind of understanding biomechanics and exercise mechanics and like anatomy, functional anatomy, and trying to obviously trying to use these different tools in our gym to apply a kind of stimulus to someone's body compass or someone's body in general. So we want to have a really, really good understanding of these tools that we're using, and then obviously the body that we're also using as well to apply obviously force and create tension in certain muscles and creating force around joints. So we want to have a pretty decent understanding how to use the tools and how the body works and how the body functions. So
Yeah.
yeah, a decent amount of knowledge. I wouldn't say I'm like I have a lot way to go. Like I've only kind of just well, not just, but had a few years kind of understanding this topic and trying to put it into practice in the kind of gym in person setting, as well as using it online as well.
Yeah, which is another like minefield in and of itself. The trying to use that in an online setting,
Yeah,
um, but I think the in person stuff is actually very useful, and that probably helps you online quite a bit. Would you say?
definitely. Yeah, I think in order to kind of fully understand and appreciate kind of biomechanics and in that area in itself, you have to be able to do it in person, and that's where you're going to really get the most out of it, and not just learning it from a book or a course, and having really really good knowledge on theoretically how to use it, then actually applying it in person when you have an individual in front of you, or you're going from individual to individual. They will have different needs and different requirements when it comes to an exercise. Not everyone's going to do a movement the same way, or not everyone's going to benefit from using a particular exercise. And there's different reasons for that. But yeah, that would be obviously very, very important to have a really, really good understanding, as well as having the experience of using that knowledge and applying it.
Yeah, I agree because I've noticed myself from the in-person work that I do that I realize very quickly, okay, maybe that cue that I've used doesn't work whatsoever,
Mm,
or maybe this one works really well, and then using that in the online setting and you figure out pretty quickly, yeah, that's what I'm gonna run with now. That'll be my kind of like my default cue. Obviously, that it can be changed in certain
mm,
scenarios, but as a general cue, this is the one that seems to be most useful. So yeah, you have you've got quite a bit of interesting things coming up this year yourself with your own physique goals, I believe. So do you want to chat a bit about them?
yeah, definitely. So as of uh, as of recently, the start of the year, I've kind of made the decision to compete towards the latter end of the year, so around the autumn time, the autumn shows. So my first show is going to be in September. It's my first time competing in the NPC league in bodybuilding. I'll be competing in the men's physique division, and I'll have kind of a string of shows, hopefully between September and October. So right now, I'm kind of coming towards the end of this improvement phase. I have 6 more weeks till I start prep, and my prep starts, I think, the 24th of April to be precise. So kind of the last week of April, and it's going to be, I think, like a 19 or 20 week prep between then and my first show on the 16th of September. That's going to be in Alicante, in Spain. And then I have a show in 2 weeks' time, that I can't talk about right now. It's still not to be announced, but it's under wraps for the minute. Hopefully, I can talk about that soon enough. But I've hopefully a show in 2 weeks' time after that, and then there's two back-to-back shows, Italy and then Hungary, which is in October, the 7th and the 14th of October. So an exciting year, a lot of things coming up, new challenges, going into obviously that division, which is very competitive. And yeah, I just need to make the most of these last 6 weeks to make obviously the improvements that I need, and then moving into prep, where, as you know, it's very laser focused. Everything needs to be on point between then and the first show. So I go away on holidays just prior to that, and then I'm kind of then not going anywhere. It's literally everything revolves around prep, so it's literally living like a
Yeah,
monk for 19-20 weeks till the first show.
living like a monk. That's exactly what I described my focus shoot prep. So I can only imagine what it's like,
Yeah,
when you're pushing it that little bit further with regard to body composition.
yeah.
What is so you competed? When was the last time you competed?
So last time I competed was 2019. That was the first time I competed. So I did two shows. The first one was the Miami Pro, over in England. Can't remember exactly where in England. And then the week after, I did the Spring Classic in the RIBBF down in Limerick, and placed fifth in the first one, placed second in the RIBBF one. Um, was a decent standard, but right now, like if we looked at the NPC division back then and now, the standard is just ridiculously different. Like that process that I went through in 2019 was just to experience what it kind of took to get to where I needed to be. And I think that was like a 16-week prep from start to finish, to the first show, and then obviously 17th week going into the RBBF. But that was solely just to experience it and just understand the process. This time around is a little bit different. There's obviously I have expectations in terms of results, and I kind of know what I'm getting into. It will be taken a little bit further in terms of body composition. I will probably be, well, I will be obviously bigger, but in terms of condition, we'll probably bring in a lot more better condition from 2019. So I kind of understand what I'm getting into, but I'd say the final few weeks will be a little bit tougher towards the end in order to get that result, in order to get that look for stage.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess for you, it's really just about bringing up everything from that stage. You're not really kind of specifically pushing anything in particular, or are you?
Yeah, actually, so we actually prioritized in the previous meso and in this current meso, my delts and my chest and my arms. They were the areas where they were lagging the most when it comes to kind of men's physique.
Yeah,
My back was always very strong. That was like my strong point, just genetically, and I'm very strong at different pulling movements, and I seem to develop a lot further, a lot quicker, with my back compared to my chest and my shoulders. So, in terms of overall volume and frequency, that changed from the previous meso, or not changed. It's been the same now from the previous meso till now. It's still focusing on bringing up them areas: my delts, my chest, my arms, and my back. Hasn't been pushed to the side, but it has enough stimulus to progress. We just have more volume directed towards the areas where I'm weaker, and where kind of the division is kind of looking for, specifically like having obviously like that kind of shoulder to waist ratio, having obviously wide lats, wide shoulders, small waist, full chest. So for me to improve my physique for the division, I need to bring up my chest would be one, and then delts and arms would be kind of a close second. So that's the current situation with training at the moment.
good stuff. Good stuff. I'm in a similar boat in that I'm currently prioritizing delts and arms, so they're being trained with a frequency of 3 times per week at the minute,
Yeah.
whereas everything else is at two. Do you train over the course of a week, or do you just have a kind of rotation that you're spinning around on?
I did have a rotation in the previous meso, but I actually changed to throughout the week. I have specific days because it suited work better. I found just like kind of work was getting in the way because certain days might change week to week. I found it okay, like having that rotation, instead of like having kind of specific days for specific muscle groups. But now it's each kind of day during the week has its own specific day. So right now it's push pull, lower quad emphasis, rest on Thursday, push again on Friday, hamstrings and lats on Saturday, and rest on Sunday, and then obviously repeat. Previously it was like a rotation, and it would change week to week.
Yeah, I'm in a very similar boat in that regard. In the only difference is I just began my meso on a Saturday because do you remember a few weeks ago I was in the gym and I was after coming off the deload. I was like, oh, I have to get back in.
Yeah,
I was really agitated at the end of that deload. I told my coach there like last week, and I was like, look, I started at, what 2 days early. I just couldn't hack it anymore. I was
yeah,
that. I think it's the environment in the gym below, man. When it's, you know yourself, like it's just a really nice environment to be in with regard to everyone's there pushing themselves. And when I was going into the gym that week of the deload and just not pushing myself, I was I was really annoyed.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I started on a Saturday and it's actually lower on that day, and then it's push pull in the days to follow. So that's some today being Sunday, I did push, pull on a Monday with arms and delts on both of them days. So this it's a new. We've had to manipulate the split a little bit this meso, just because the way it was in the last meso, on one side of the week I was always hitting chest like with 1 day of recovery and it just wasn't enough. So I'm take like I'm just dealing with probably the lesser of the evils in that we're now pushing delts and arms back to back a little bit. It seems to be working so far. It's fine, but as my volume increases, it might be a bit of an issue in just with regard to recovery. But so far it seems to be all right. Then I'll have a rest day, and then we're back in for like lower, which will be a that one will be a hamstring emphasis session. And when I say that, I just mean that I'll do an RDL first, and I'll have a lying hamstring curl after that. Then I'll have my quad movements. Whereas on the other day, the quads take, they're a little bit earlier in the session, and then upper being my final day of the week. That's a long drawn out session, but
Yeah.
we get there. Um, so yeah, that's cool. And then just with regards to, have you got anything else you want to add with regard to goals or anything like that?
Um, Not really. I think just again bringing a better, well, I definitely will bring you a better physique to stage at the end of the year, and my goal in terms of results would be like kind of a first call outs in the show. I don't really have a placement in mind. I just would like to be in that first call outs for the first show. And that is kind of my aim going into the NPC for the first time. So that would be my expectation towards the end of the year.
I guess it's always difficult because you don't know who else is going to show up at these shows. Like,
Yeah,
you know yourself, a lot of the way a lot of people might set their goal. Like for me personally, if I was ever to compete, Jack, I'd be in the same mindset in that it would be an externally based goal in that in a placing or something like that. Whereas I know other individuals will just be focusing or trying to focus on themselves and bettering that over time,
yeah,
because obviously that's something that you can actually control, whereas you can't really control who else shows up. I'm
yeah,
sure it's quite difficult in that regard, because you could have a packed division of like a really good standard, or you could have like a couple of individuals show up. That's the reality of it.
yeah.
Um, but anyways, yeah. So with regard to then, if we moved over to kind of like training yourself and then training other individuals, you know, there's probably going to be some differences there, I'm sure,
Yeah,
because what you can expect of yourself or of someone with similar goals to you might be slightly different towards what you can expect from, a gem pop client who's coming in and trying to just improve their health. So, have you got some sort of a training hierarchy that you're kind of looking at there, or maybe just some general considerations or differences that you have in mind?
yeah. So are we talking about like when we talk about someone, we're talking about someone who is a general population client who's just trying to just improve their body composition from where it's at, not like looking to have um any goals in mind to do a photo shoot or compete. Like,
You know what? There's probably a continuum there that we can discuss. So, like,
yeah,
on one end of the continuum, just overall health. Sorry, I
hmm,
should probably understand overall health, and then you're moving towards that kind of photo shoot prep area, and then
hmm,
down towards the prep side of things.
yeah,
Some differences there that you may be thinking about.
yeah, definitely. So when we're looking at kind of general population, um, really kind of the main thing, and this can be said for like nutrition and any other kind of factor you're trying to implement in, is adherence to obviously what they can do and taking on board what they've done in the past and their experience levels kind of coming to you. So asking kind of questions to them like what have they done in the past, what is their background in training, and their if they have a sports background, and this will feed into like what can they do in the gym from like a from a standpoint where they enjoy it first and foremost. So I'm trying not to force things on top of them, and then from like a skill level, what can they do with their own skill requirements. So that's a huge one that I think is like overlooked, to be honest, is trying to fit exercises to the client and not kind of allowing the client or the person in front of you to actually fit into an exercise. So try not to incorporate things that are going to be really skillful or really demanding from, let's say, a coordination standpoint or just a skills standpoint in general.
Yeah,
Maybe choosing movements that kind of is very like easy to perform, that gives them that kind of again enjoyment, and that they're getting it correct, and there's some positive reinforcement there with their training, and not doing something where they feel very overwhelmed and they start getting kind of confused and frustrated with training. So I think that's a huge aspect that gets overlooked when you have someone who's quite new to training or has a young training age, is choosing exercises that they think they will do correctly and that they will enjoy. When you start moving across that continuum and they have a lot of experience and they're very competent with exercises, you then have a wider range of things to use because their competency, their skill level is a lot higher. So I think that's really kind of one thing that stands out the most with me is when someone comes to me and they're new to training, I'm going to choose things that are very easy to do right now, get some positive reinforcement that they're doing things correctly, they're working hard, and then from there we can look at progressions with exercises. So
yeah,
when we go out to the gym floor, I might choose an exercise that I might think is appropriate for that individual, but maybe it isn't, and they can't do it correctly, or they have a limitation when doing that exercise, and they're getting frustrated. So when I'm in that position, I have to think of a regression to that exercise or something similar in order to get a similar outcome. And that's going to be more general for someone who is new to training and doesn't have any real specific body composition goals. And then on the other side, when someone is, let's say, doing a photo shoot, or let's say someone competing in a bodybuilding show, it'll be a little more specific when it comes to that regression or progression with exercise in terms of this, there'll be a specific outcome to using that exercise or a specific outcome when challenging a specific muscle group. So hopefully that makes sense.
yeah. I think this leads to an important point of, you know, how specific someone needs to be with their training has to be specific to their goals.
Yeah.
One of the things that Tom Purvis talks about early in RTS is who is the person,
Hmm.
what is their goal, what do they have, what do they own, and what can they tolerate. You know,
Yeah.
and these considerations need to be put in place all of the time, because someone coming in for one of their first training sessions probably doesn't need to master the iliac pull down, because
Yeah.
no, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's not that important. Like, I saw a post recently about the iliac pull down, and the kind of individuals who were commenting underneath it, I was just like, I do not think that this is the most relevant tool that you need at your disposal right now.
Hmm.
You just need to get bigger lats, you know, because you get individuals doing the iliac pull down. I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
Um, and then like they've got half a lat, which is at the bottom. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, what's going on here? Um, so like, you know, things like that. I think it's really important to consider what a person needs has to be relative to where they are. Um, Delving even more, like if we even zoom in a little bit more with our lens
Yeah.
from that continuum, and we start to work towards um, a specific movement. Okay, so for me, I've got a little bit of a hierarchy with regard to what I'm looking for there. Well, can I run through that quickly and then
Yeah, of
yeah,
course. Yeah, definitely.
you'll probably have stuff to add to it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But so we've got all of this great research which tells us about how intense you need to work, how much volume you need to do, but none of them matter in my mind unless the execution is on point first. So when I'm thinking about building even one exercise, let's go with one exercise and getting the most out of that exercise, I always start from that foundational point of view of let's get execution into a good position. And execution isn't just how that person is moving, it's also how they've set up for that before that even gets into place. Because as I'll say to my clients initially, um, if you do not set up the exercise appropriately, you've straight away handicapped yourself there. Because if you're not setting if your setup is not appropriate, the rest of everything that you do within that set cannot be appropriate. For example, if you are looking to bias your quads in a hack squat, I love using the hack squat for example, so I'm probably going to use that a lot.
Hmm.
If you set them up the top of the hack squat, if your setup is wrong there, you're not going to get as much knee flex straight away. So it doesn't matter how hard you work or how much volume of that you do, you know, it was wrong from the very start. Okay. So once you get the setup appropriate, we're looking at how you're actually moving through space there and what's happening with the muscle with regard to range of motion and just overall control and how reproducible each rep of that is over one set. Okay.
Hmm.
And then from there, what I'm thinking of is this isn't even something I might not discuss how hard a client is working for about 6 weeks, okay? Because all I'm doing, obviously depending on the individual now, but I'm taking someone who's maybe coming in from maybe doing a couple of circuit classes before or something like that.
Yeah.
Once they've got the execution locked down, then I'll start to go, I think you can work a little bit harder here. So we're starting to talk about the intensity the intensity of effort within each set. And what I'm really looking for there is the change in velocity of reps over time. Because we know that if I like to just simplify things and think of things with regard to, I think it was Chris Beardsley's effective reps theory, where we're thinking about the last maybe 5 reps from failure being the most important or the most hypertrophic, okay? But with around 5 reps from failure, exercise dependent, what you're going to see is a slowing down of reps. And for different movements, it might be a little bit less or a little bit more. Um, but we need to be seeing them reps really slow down, and we're actually appropriate. I think after once them foundational components are in place, and depending on the movement, I think it's fine to fail. So then we'll show an individual how intensely they're working within a set and how much they need to do. And from there, and I know myself and yourself may have slightly different kind of intensities that will work with clients, but I might have a range within there. So maybe from 3 reps in reserve to failure, because we know where in and around where failure is now. We might pull back 2 reps from there and work up over time from there. So really what I'm saying is I'm initially working on within one set how that setup is, within one set how intense that is, and then finally, and the thing that is considered to be the most important factor for muscle hypertrophy is the volume side of things. So then we're just thinking about how much of that they're doing. And for me, when I think about that, I need a lot of feedback from the client as to kind of perfect that, because it could be that 2 sets are absolutely perfect. For me, in a hack squat or a leg press, I can't do more than 2 sets, or else I'm not going to walk for a few days.
Yeah.
Um, for another individual, females in particular tend to have a little bit of a higher volume tolerance. You probably would you agree as a general rule?
Generally, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, generally. Um, we'll start to build that up to the point where we're seeing that we can continue to improve our performance, and then that we're ready for that next session. And that's how I tend to look at getting the most out of an exercise: setup, execution, intensity, and then how much of that you need to do. Have you got anything to add in regard to that?
That's pretty much bang on. What I would probably maybe add to that, which is probably a little bit more specific, is um, kind of the accuracy of that movement, and we're trying to essentially um, align kind of what you're trying to achieve with your body and the tool that you're using or the resistance that you're using. So trying to match kind of, if I want to challenge my chest, my arm needs to move in this direction. I want the resistance to kind of complement that. I want the resistance to be in line with where my arm is pulling across or pushing across. So the accuracy of that movement, kind of, which kind of ties into your setup again, kind of starting off with that setup, is does that movement align with the objective that I'm trying to achieve with my body? But everything laid out there, that's pretty much how I would have said it as well. Keeping it simple and breaking it down in that kind of format is pretty much kind of bang on. Yeah, and you can kind of, again, from there you can make things a little more nuanced and be a little more specific and talk about different things, but that's pretty much
Yeah.
the gist of it. Yeah.
And one of them things is obviously how hard you need to train,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
So,
um
on,
and that, and like you said there, in terms of perceived intensity, or like perceive, like your perception of failure, and kind of failure being kind of, it can be multiple things, and we've kind of talked about this previously as well, is like, what are we defining failure as for that individual? Is it failure of the actual skill and the execution of the movement and that kind of changing altogether? Is it the actual muscular failure that is occurring or not being able to actually complete the task at hand? So that's
yeah,
definitely something to consider with the individual as well as the exercise being used. So yeah.
there's a really good review that was put out on that this year. I'm not sure, you might have seen it, by Martin Ruffalo.
I think I've
I
seen
think,
it thrown on Instagram a few times.
yeah, it's really good. He broke it down into kind of three ways that you can, look at failure with regard to, like, muscular failure, where you cannot complete the rep
Yeah,
whatsoever. Technical failure, I believe. I think it was technical failure, the other one, and then just velocity of movement. So, like,
yeah,
having a velocity kind of band, but that's probably the least kind of practical way that you can use it, just because you need to get like some like VBT kind of velocity based training equipment to use within training, and I just don't think it's that necessary, to be honest
yeah,
with you.
yeah,
It's one of them things that I don't think is necessary. But regardless of what you're actually, sorry, I won't say regardless, based on the research, and I definitely think that that paper is quite important, so that future papers do a better job of deciding and defining what they're saying that failure is.
yeah,
um, because myself and yourself know that there's a lot in research that needs to improve. I would definitely say there's a lot that has been improved, but there's definitely more to go in that kind of regard. Um, but really, I think as a general rule, what we're seeing is that um, we understand what is required now to cause a robust hypertrophic response with regard to intensity, and we need to be training pretty hard, to say the least.
yeah,
Um, like, where do you fall with regard to training intensity? And because I know how you train, and I know we train slightly differently in this regard,
yeah,
but we probably agree with each other on the intensity kind of side of things, and the differences are probably mostly psychological, like, and just preference based
yeah.
as to how we're training. So where do you fall with regard to that?
Yeah, so with myself, like you mentioned there, when it comes to preference, I kind of enjoy kind of that higher intensity training to, let's say, failure or pretty damn close to failure. Obviously, that's not how everyone should train. Not all of my clients train to failure. I do like all the time, which is a thing that I will expose to them. where in their training they will do a reps in reserve approach, and then in the sessions, let's say with myself, if it's in person, or if it's online, I'll try and communicate that in a way where they can do it in a safe manner. Obviously, with myself and me being there, it's even safer, but I'd have to be very careful with how I communicate failure online. But most of my clients, pretty much like 95% of my clients, will take a reps and reserve approach, and I might expose them to one or two sets of actual failure and push them past their limits, or what their perceived limits are. Um, and that can be across a lot of exercises, but specifically exercises that are very stable and safe, and don't require a lot of kind of internal support and having to create stability themselves. So having external support to create a safe environment to work from. If it's online, I'll be very, very particular about what I give to failure. A very simple one would be the likes of a leg extension and being safe in that, and their likelihood, their risk of injury is quite low if they're not taking the piss. Like obviously, I'm not going to kind of tell them to go to failure on, let's say, a hinge or a deadlift, or let's say a barbell squat, if they haven't really done squats or barbell squats very often,
Yeah.
or they're only new to actually train to failure. That would probably be wouldn't be a good idea. So both work, reps and reserve, and obviously kind of top set, back off set approach of kind of zero RAR, train to failure. They both work. It's just for who. We both know that through looking at the literature. But again, like you said, it does come down a lot of times to preference and what people like. I like training to failure. I like going to failure. Um, sometimes I don't, when I'm absolutely beat up and I need to take a little bit of time off the gym. But I like that training style. I like that approach, and some people don't, which is perfectly fine.
I think, yeah, I think what you've realized is sorry, what you are going to, how you are going to get the best out of yourself in a gym setting, and how
Yeah,
you're best going to stay locked in to a session, which will obviously add up over time. And and you've talked to me before about the fact that you will have periods of time where maybe you're not training like that,
yeah.
because you need to take that little bit of a back off. Will you be taking a bit of an approach like that leading up into the prep, or is it get as much as you can while you can right now?
Yeah, it's funny how you mentioned that. So actually, this week from Monday to today was actually, it wasn't a reduction in training intensity. It was actually it was a devolume week. So I didn't perform the same amount of sets. It was actually my first week in this new meso. So there was actually some new movements that I actually haven't done before, and then some old movements that I haven't performed in a while. So it was more so greasing the groove, getting back into the swing of things with it, getting kind of used to that setup and execution of the movement. Still training quite like hard. I was still trying to go pretty close to failure for one set on my main, let's say, compound movements. My isolation movements I kept the same, but that was off the back of a previous week where I felt a bit beat up and I was kind of feeling the symptoms of overreaching. Kind of joints were feeling a bit sore, motivation to train, readiness to train wasn't there. These different kind of signals that you'll experience when you know if you need either deload, devolume, or just time off the gym. I'm not sure how it's going to be approached coming out of this improvement phase, going into my prep. Obviously, Alan, my coach, mentor, will be obviously guiding me on that. He has the reins when it comes to that, so he will decide what is the best course of action. But definitely feeling a lot better off the back of um, this devolume, and obviously going into next week, different approach, different mindset, feeling a bit fresher, feeling more recovered. So tomorrow's session will be kind of back to normal, back to baseline, when it comes to volume, and go from there.
Yeah, so I think that's just another example of how like you can do different things and end up with the same result with a devolume slash deload kind of style. What you're doing is you're reducing training stress. That is the ultimate aim of either of them things, and it's down to again. Do you know what? I think I would actually prefer a devolume myself because otherwise I do not want to go to the gym. At least if I know I'm pushing a little bit, I can actually go in and get some productive stuff done. Of course, you can make the argument that a productive kind of deload kind of thing is to reduce stress. So whichever way you do that doesn't really matter. Um, but yeah, it's just another example of different things leading to the same result. And
Yeah,
what you really need to do with any of these things is understand the actual outcome that you're looking to get, and from there, understanding the different paths that you can take to that outcome. You know, same with hypertrophy, how intensely you're working. Once you're kind of looking at that and then also considering the volume side of things, you know, you could end up at a similar response because all you need to do is look at people who train in both kind of ways getting great results. You know, ending up on the same stage, all of the time. I think there's an external side to this, which is what most people talk about. It's the fact that you do resistance training. It's the fact that you're training muscles through, their range, an appropriate range. It's that you're doing 6 to 20 or 6 to 30 reps. It's that you're training hard, and it's that you're doing it with enough volume. But there's the internal side then that is often forgotten about. So when you make these big statements about the external, so how hard you need to train, you're forgetting about what's actually happening to cause the response
yeah,
internally. So with regard to mechanotransduction, um, and so you've a requirement to overcome an external force. There's the transmission of mechanical tension from the sarcomere along through the tendons and bones to produce movement to overcome that external force. And ultimately, what you're getting then is disruption to the muscle. From that disruption, mechanosensors convert that, sorry, not chemical, that mechanical signal into a chemical signal, and then you get the cascade of, you know, mechanotransduction, where essentially you end up with the intracellular signaling for protein synthesis.
yeah,
And that's what causes things. And how you come to that conclusion or to that point can be done in many ways.
yeah,
But just stating that you have to train to failure or you have to train with reps in reserve, because I've openly said I thought in the past reps in reserve was the best approach, whereas now I'm like, I don't know about that anymore. Um, but ultimately, that's the kind of it's a signaling cascade that you're trying to result in, and
yeah,
ultimately the upregulation of mTOR.
yeah.
Mainly mTOR and then protein synthesis, and as a result of that, along with good nutrition, you end up in a net positive protein balance for the day, and then you're massive.
That's it. Simple as that. Done and dusted. That's
That's
the end
it,
of the
though.
podcast. um, yeah. So trying to kind of like, I think I mentioned this to you before as well. Like, for that's pretty much the kind of end goal is protein synthesis and trying to create more protein, trying to create more muscle. And so we're using tools in the gym to provide force to your body, so applying tension to muscles. That tension is then going to, hopefully, if we're training to a decent degree of failure, again, reps in reserve or complete failure, we're going to get a response, a kind of signaling response, like you mentioned, to produce more protein. So we're going to use a tool in the gym to create tension on specific musculature, which will then hopefully lead to more protein synthesis overall and create a net protein, or sorry, a
Positive.
positive protein balance. Sorry, I was thinking net protein balance. Like, no, we don't want that. A positive protein balance. So we end up with more protein, more muscle over time. So I think keeping it that way, keeping it in that kind of structure makes the most sense. I think people tend to forget that in terms of they really focus on, like you said, the external thing, and they get caught up on the external kind of outcome when it comes to moving certain tools, moving a free weight, moving a machine, moving a cable, and not so much what's happening internally. And that's a good point that you just mentioned there.
Yeah, you probably tied it up nicer than I did, but we got there
Well,
together.
that's it's the same thing. Like again, like um, I think what like communication is very important when it comes to coaching, and knowing who you're speaking to is very
Yeah,
important. It's a big skill, and I'm always going to be trying to understand that a bit better in terms of communicating to the individual in front of me. Like obviously, me and you can communicate in a different way compared to the people listening to this, and I
yeah,
think both are very valid. I think you being able to explain something, or if I'm explaining something that's really sciencey or really um complicated, quote unquote, and then the other person starts to just try and break that down in a more digestible way. And I think both are very important. I think both are justified, especially if there's a coach listening where they want to understand the sciencey words, and then they also need to understand how to kind of translate that to kind of normal people words, if you want to call it, or people who just want results and they don't want to hear you speak about mechanotransduction and these signaling pathways and mTOR and all that kind of stuff, which is great if me and you are having a conversation about it, and we love that. But obviously, the person who wants the results probably doesn't unless they're very interested in that topic. So
yeah.
both are valid.
If you want to go deeper down that rabbit hole, there's a great paper by Wackeridge which will make you feel very silly. Wackeridge and Brad Schoenfeld. It's
Yeah,
I don't understand half of the words that they use, so I've read it about 10 times, but I don't really understand it.
yeah,
It's
yeah. And
it's quite
like I remember like starting like to read papers and starting to like go through kind of literature. It would take me more time to understand the word being used and not actually the outcome of the paper and knowing what it is. Like I could probably read through it and have to skim over some big words, and by the end of it I have a general gist, but I'd spend more time kind of understanding the words that they're being used and trying to translate it in a way that I understand it. Um, yeah, like you could read certain things and they go, "I'm just stupid. I'm just I can't. Why am I doing this?" But yeah, both are valid.
so take home from this part is understand the external, what you need to do from that side of things.
The objective.
Lift, lift, lift weights, lift in a rep range of +6 reps, close to failure. And over time, what you want to consider is not just progressive overload, but progressive tension overload. Because whilst we can think external, it's the internal which does the thing. So although your logbook might say that you're up in reps or load, the internal signaling will determine if you're going to, be maximizing what you can do from that side of things.
Yeah,
Cool.
pretty much. I think that's a nice kind of segue onto. I think obviously we talked about like range of motion and resistance profiles and strike profiles, and